Hello, my name is Dr. Matt Zakreski, and this is Fostering Creativity in and Outside of the Classroom. Everybody calls me Dr. Matt, and I'm a clinical psychologist, professional speaker, and neurodivergence advocate. And my professional practice is bridging neuroscience and clinical practice to make skills accessible for you and your loved ones. For what we're going to do in today's video, we are going to define creativity, talk about how it manifests in the classroom, and talk about how to use creativity in your lives without losing your mind. So it's important to start a conversation like this by talking about what is creativity, right? So take a moment now and you can pause the video or, talk amongst yourselves. Like, what is creativity? What are the ways that you would describe it? Words that we often hear are out of the box thinking, seeing things others don't, making connections others can't. But take a few minutes and think about creativity. And now that you've unpaused or had your conversation, let's go through the three principal definitions. Um, Michael Mumford, the gentleman up here to the right, seemed to have reached a general agreement that creativity involves the production of novel, useful products. Now, this is a really interesting idea. And you see it a lot cited in creativity literature. Paul Torrance, creator of the Torrance test of creativity, calls creativity a process of becoming sensitive to problems, deficiencies, gaps in knowledge, missing elements, disharmonies, and so on, identifying the difficulty and searching for solutions. So, this really, I think, vibes with a lot of the neurodivergent community because that sensitivity, missing elements, disharmonies, that's sort of how a lot of neurodivergent kids see the world. So I think, potentially becoming aware of that is a good way to think about creativity. And last but not least, James Averill in the bottom right corner calls emotional creativity a pattern of cognitive abilities and personality traits related to originality. And, so really thinking about creativity as more of a personality structure rather than, an academic discipline or something you think. My favorite definition of creativity is the ability to create and the use of imagination or original ideas. Because I think that for for creativity to be its most pure, we have to be able to treat it as something that is not tied to output. Schools are all about output. They love the tests, the scores, the papers, the projects, the trifolds, all that good stuff. I think part of creativity is just sitting and thinking and coming up with creative solutions, not even solutions, creative ideas. So, you know, the idea of it being novel and useful is a wonderful thing in the real world. But as you're developing these skills with kids, I find it much more helpful to reframe it as just the process of thinking outside the box. So, a big piece of my specialty as a clinical psychologist is working with gifted kids, and psychology and gifted have a long history together. And it's worth noting that gifted kids are naturally divergent thinkers. They think why. And when we think about giftedness as making connections and seeing relationships that others might not, it opens the door to that kind of thinking process. Certainly, Joe Renzulli's three-ring conception of giftedness, Joe being sort of the godfather of our field, true gifted behavior involves creativity, right? I think that this is where we get into the difference between kids who are high achievers who can follow a recipe versus kids who are gifted who create a recipe. It's certainly a high level of skill to replicate a Gordon Ramsay cheeseburger. But if halfway through the process you realize, like, oh man, if I fry some kale and make a hollandaise sauce to put on this burger, it's going to take it up a notch. Well, that's creativity. Nobody's telling you to do that. So you have to have high levels of skill, focus, and dedication mixed with original and interesting thinking. So, if we were all together, I would have us all get into a group right now to do this exercise. It's one of my favorite exercises to do. We are going to create a gifted kid playlist. Now, I know that You may not be an expert on giftedness, or you have done this forever, but think about what you know and use that knowledge to pick at least 12 items from the next screen to create a playlist, whether it's like, a Spotify playlist, for us old school types, it'd be like an old school mixed CD, right? We're going to burn it in our CD tower, but the young ones are staring at us blankly right now. So I'll just move on, and feel free to include 2 to 3 of your own. So here's all the ones I've come up with. And if you click on these links in the PowerPoint you're going to get, they will link directly to all the lyrics. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Now, obviously, if we were in person, I would be giving you more time, but since you can pause me, since this is a recording, I will just move along to honor your time. So when you look at your list, you made somewhere between, 8 to 15 songs. Think about the songs you chose. Why'd you choose them? Was that easy? Was it hard? The songs that we've chosen in here are in there to really sort of get at the Gifted Kid experience in a lot of different ways, right? You might associate giftedness with high level orchestral music like Bach and Mozart. You might associate it with nerd culture like the Imperial March from Star Wars or Jimmy Neutron. Or you might be going for something a little bit more on the nose, like the song I'm Smarter Than You by Random Encounters or Headstrong by Trapped. Um, there's the cool thing about here is that there's nothing on here that's wrong. In fact, creativity can't be wrong. So I have songs on here that I associate with being gifted from going to gifted kid camps as a kid. I have songs in here that other people have told me definitely make me think about gifted kids. So it's a really complex list, and you can't be wrong. And I would love to know what are the unique songs you guys came up with, and feel free to email me those. You'll have my email at the end of the presentation. So the takeaway from this is that creativity is both easier and harder than we think. Easier to pick a few things because you can't be wrong. Harder because how do you come up with your own things that fit the same vibe? Everybody can be creative and everybody is creative. One of the things we're going to talk about in the back hack of this presentation is how to work with kids who don't think they're creative, even though everybody can be. And creativity isn't just one thing. It can be applied anywhere. So you can be creative in the arts, which is where most people associate it, but you can be creative in the kitchen or on the soccer field or on the or in your Lego building or in how you do the dishes, right? Trust your instincts, and there's no wrong way to be creative. We can open the doors for lots of different ways of processing and seeing the world. So when I was at Gifted Kid Camp, they had us write a paper one summer about, what we thought the meaning of a song was. So because it was the mid 90s and I was a white boy from the suburbs, I picked Matchbox 20 and I talked about the song Real World. And I thought that song was about Rob Thomas talking about his relationship with his dad. And the person who was teaching my class wrote back like, this is a well-written paper, but your interpretation of this is entirely wrong. There's no way this is about his dad, and at Center for Talented Youth, you don't get grades on things. They were just like, you missed the point. And 10 years later, I'm listening to a podcast with Rob Thomas, and he's talking about how that song is about his relationship with his dad. And I quickly found my old teacher on Facebook and sent her a message. Ha! I was right. So in that particular situation, right, I ended up getting proved right. But one of the things Rob Thomas said in this podcast was that he felt like the meaning had changed over time. So we don't ever want to shut down a kid's creativity of answers because rarely is there one answer and things may shift as they go. So there are 4 main types of creativity. Mini C or transformative learning. This is basically how we make meaningful interpretations of our experiences to interpret the world in a positive way. So it can be something as simple as, which one of these is left? Well, my hand that makes the L is the left hand. That's transformative learning. I'm taking my experience and making it a learning experience. Or you can remember the old school idea for, Pedmas. Um, Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, right? I mean, that's, we all had that as kids. Little C creativity is everyday problem solving and creative expression. So, we all use creativity all day to get through our days, especially if you're in education, mental health, or you work with kids in any way, because kids are not consistent. They respond to different things day by day, hour by hour, sometimes minute by minute. So it can be something as simple as, you're usually a super high energy teacher, but you notice the class is a little flat today. So you decide to meet their energy level. Or it can be one of those things like, I need to run to the main office to run off some copies, but I need to do these three things first. How do I do them all in one big trip? We all use little c creativity to get through our days every day. Pro C creativity are exhibited by people who are professionally or vocationally creative, though not necessarily eminent. So I would fall under the pro C type of creativity, right? I am a clinical psychologist, which requires a lot of creativity, and a professional speaker, which means I have to use a lot of thinking on my feet. And I may not necessarily be eminent, right? This gives a lot of space for us to use creativity in our jobs, whether you are someone who does that more overtly, like an artist or a dancer or a singer or a musician, but any job that requires you to create or think outside the box, like a chef or an Uber driver or a teacher or a coach, we all are pro C creative types. And last but not least, big C creativity. Creativity that is considered great or paradigm shifting in the given field. So that can be somebody like Scott Barry Kaufman in the world of psychology, or Lin-Manuel Miranda in musical theater, or Bobby Flay in cooking arts. I mean, there's no shortage of people who LeBron James in basketball, you know, their creativity is paradigm shifting. Like the world literally different for them having been here. And our kids are going to want to be big C creative types. Right? Everybody wants to be Albert Einstein, but there are lots of people who are pro C creative who are not as famous, but certainly influential in their own spheres of influence. In the process to create creativity, we use, instead of the four C's, we use the four P's. This is Mel Rhodes. So, what tools are available to the person? That's the process of creativity. What standards are we holding them to, and who's monitoring them? The product of creativity, I mentioned that before, right? That we are very focused on what do we end up making from our creative process. Then person, who is the person that's doing the creating? What are their strengths and likes versus their weaknesses and dislikes? I am I've been a very successful public speaker and clinical psychologist, but I know that environments that allow me to do a lot of thinking on my feet and a lot of, being in the moment work a lot better for me than if I was in a big randomized R1 clinical trial where I had to read the same script every day to 17 different clients. That's not going to work well for me. And maybe you're more that type. Maybe you're somebody who wants to cook the chocolate chip cookies the exact same way every time, and that's fine. Do that, right? But know the person to adapt the creativity. And then last but not least, place. Are we setting aside time and space for creativity? And how are we doing it? And when are we doing it? We are all busy. We're all overworked. And the first thing to go in a creative space I'm sorry, in an educational space is the time for creativity. So it's important to think about which one feels most important to you. I think that while the person ends up being most important, it's also worth noting the place. So Google has this policy in their company that their high-level engineers get 20% of their time to just fiddle with stuff. Create, code, throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks, because they know that creative types, neurodivergent types, need time to explore and play. And Google has benefited from this because not only is it a happier workplace, but it's also they've gotten a lot of good products out of it, including Google Earth and Frugal have come from this 20% time. So giving your kids time to be creative, to play, to get messy is helpful for not only their intellectual health, but also their sometimes even their professional health. So this is what it might look like in a classroom, right? Most of the work I do is with kids, so I interface a lot with schools. If you assume a 7 subject day, you know, you could do subjects A through F on Monday, with G getting the extra 20%. Tuesday, B through G, and A gets the 20%, and on down the line. That way, each class gets a day to be creative, to think outside the box. And if your administrators push back on this, remember, it's like classwork is worth more, is counts more than homework. Kids learn quickly anyway, and creativity rubrics are actually in Common Core, so you're not shortchanging your kids in any way. But like I said before, the most important the aspect of creativity is the P for person. We don't teach everyone the same way, so we can't expect the same kind of creativity from everyone. You know, do some pre-project surveys, and they'll really help you create a playbook or a manual for that kid. Are kids divergent thinkers? Are they right brain creative, or are they convergent, left brain logical? How complex do they like to be? Are they concrete thinkers, or are they abstract thinkers? I'm a very abstract thinker, right? I love big ideas, concepts, that's where I live. A lot of kids, especially your STEM kids, are going to be much more concrete. They'll write you a great chemistry experiment. That's creative, right? We tend to think of creativity more as the kid who paints the 70-foot mural, and that's creative too, but there's room for both. You want to really think about looping kids together based on their learning styles and their intelligence, right? So here's our divergent versus convergent thinkers, and not one is good or bad, right? There's time for both of them. But you want to put kids who think similarly together, because intelligence is not just book smarts. People can be intelligent, even gifted in multiple domains, but they might not know it or understand it. So you want to get a lot of information and start with their interests. Because when you look at these kinds of intelligences, you've got a natural intelligence, musical, logical, existential, intrapersonal, and interpersonal, bodily kinesthetic, linguistic. It's not just, oh, do you know all the state capitals? Or, oh, can you do 17 times 4? Those are only parts of intelligence. But the idea here is, by understanding all these different things, you can put kids in situations and workshops and give them assignments that play to these strengths. So here's one way you might want to limp them together. Put your interactive kids together, your linguistic, interpersonal, and kinesthetic learners. They're the people who are going to do a skit, right? They're going to write a rap about, the life cycle of the cell, right? Your introspective kids, visual, existential, intrapersonal, they know themselves, they're sensitives. They're going to probably they might do a painting, they might write a paper, right? They're going to want to explore something. Your analytic people, your logical, rhythmic, and naturalist kids, they're going to want to do an experiment. They're going to do something concrete that they can show how they learned. And our job as the adults in charge is to put kids in situations that play to these strengths. So, one of the things that schools do is they try to make kinesthetic learners sit in chairs, right? And then they wonder why the kids are struggling. They want to make kids who are existential and introspective, stand up in front of the classroom and give a 20-minute speech on, the Lincoln Douglas style debate. Maybe that's not their strength. We don't need kids to be able to do everything to be successful. So looking at this gives us a way to be creative ourselves and looping people together, whether it's athletes on a sports team, or different kinds of theater kids, or people in a classroom, or in like a therapy group, right? I'm going to put my linguistic personal kids together in a group because their style of communication, they're going to talk all over each other. They're going to be bouncing off the walls. That's great. Whereas our kids who are more introspective, they're going to need that time and space. They might need more structure. So here is a way where you could use different kinds of thinking and different kinds of creativity to do something that you might not feel really sort of jives with creativity, physics. So what I've done here is just looked out different kinds of physics topics, how to do that format and what content, but how to tweak it with presentation and AV to make sure that you're hitting the different kinds of thinkers, different kinds of learners. All of these ways of learning physics are going to help kids learn physics and help their classmates learn physics, but they're all designed to hit different kinds of learning and creativity and give kids a leg up. So here's the learning pyramid. And, every time I show this slide when I do this talk, I always laugh because it's like I'm doing the thing that I'm not supposed to do, right? I'm lecturing. And I'm providing audio visuals and some demonstrations, but a lot of the stuff I'm giving you, especially as you watch this recording, at home or on your PD day or whatever, you're doing a lot of passive learning. We want to move to active learning. That's why I think the best professional development things have practice by doing, discussion, demonstrating in front of others. That's when you get up in front of people. That's when it becomes active and differentiated learning to really lock in those skills. So this is a long slide on a lot of different ways to put these things on. You guys are going to get these slides, so I'm just going to move along through this one. So here's our next demonstration activity. So let's plan a theme party. So think about what we need for a theme party, and with the people you're with, talk to them like, what do they need to do the party? Who's going to do what? And remember, play to your strengths. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Assuming you have now unpaused the video. One of the things you're going to see is that people naturally pick things they're good at and or want to do, right? Nobody sits there and goes like, well, I love cooking, but I'm going to work the door and handle the money because I guess that's what people need me to do. If you play to people's strengths, they get more engaged, they have more fun, and they're happier so that you don't have to manage them as much. I love a good party, and I'm a great host. I'm a great bartender, right? You want me, working the room, saying hi to people, making some cocktails, all that stuff's great. You don't want me scheduling it. You don't want me trying to book a venue. You certainly don't want me taking money at the door. I will forget or lose it. I know my strengths and weaknesses. So I'm never going to pick a thing that doesn't play into my strengths if I am given my own choice, right? The answers you give are creative regardless of whether there's a theme to the theme party. Maybe you guys pick, Jazz Age, or maybe you pick Under the Sea, or maybe you pick horror movie. Doesn't matter because your answers aren't going to change that much because the people who don't really like parties are going to do stuff like cutlery and paper goods. And people who are super hyped for the party are going to do costumes and recruiting people. They're all good ideas. Not everybody engages in things the same way. And part of being creative is making space for those different processes. So the idea here is we want to create in the classroom structured chaos. What most people tell me when I do this talk is like, Dr. Matt, I would love to do more creativity. I can see the benefits of it. I know it makes sense, but I just I can't pick my classroom up for 45 minutes every day. Like, the kids will set things on fire. I don't have time for that. Marrying structure and chaos together is actually the best for creativity. If it's too chaotic, we can't be creative. And if we're too structured, we bleed the creativity out of it. So this is where we talk about the concept of backyarding. So when I was little and creative and hyperactive and wanted to do all the things all the time, sometimes my mom would send me into the backyard, not to punish me, but to be like, you've got a lot of energy, go be creative out there. And our backyard had a fence. So while I was in the fenced-in area, she knew I was safe, right? I couldn't get over the fence. So I could play Star Wars or Ninja Turtles or build a catapult out there, knowing I wasn't going to get hurt. So you give me a lot of space to run around and be creative with a firm external structure. So the way we do this in our classrooms or our therapy offices is we establish rules for creativity time, like the times that we did before. We talk about when and how to ask for help, when and how to talk to your peers, and create trust. Because a big piece of creativity is having the trust in the educational environment and in the teachers to be able to be creative, because creative involves taking risks, right? You're putting yourself out there. So we're going to talk about some warm-up exercises for creativity later, but the concept here is backyarding. Firm external structure and give the kids a lot of space to play. So if every day for a half hour after lunch, you guys, all right, guys, it's free work time, draw, paint, write, code, whatever you're going to do until 1 o'clock, that would be your backyarding example. The process of creativity is commonly associated with Graham Wallas, who was actually in the London School of Economics. So the first step is preparation. You do preparatory work on a problem that focuses your mind on the problem and explore it. So, you've got to do the back work, the mise en place, if you're a cooking person. Incubation, you internalize the problem and it just starts rolling around in the back part of your brain. It doesn't look like anything's happening, but you're thinking. Intimation, the person gets a feeling the solution's coming, right? It's like, okay, I'm near I feel like something's about to happen. I'm close to that idea. And and when I give this talk, people go like, yeah, I know that feeling. It's a hard feeling to describe, but your brain like knows something's about to happen. Illumination or insight, the creative idea bursts forth. What am I going to do with these Thanksgiving leftovers? Oh, hold on. I could make a hash or a burrito, right? You can do a lot of things with Thanksgiving leftovers. And then verification, you do the idea, you elaborate it, and you apply it. Then you get feedback from that idea on how to make it better and do it again. So incubation, of course, is the most important part of this concept. So, as illustrated up here with Newton having the apple land on his head, incubation is defined as when attending to a different task, humans forget about previous unsuccessful attempts and can engage with the task anew, often to find the solution. What this means is if you're struggling with doing something, give yourself permission to take an active break. If you've been working for a while and you just feel stuck, go take a walk around the block or go make yourself a cup of coffee. As you can see in this chart, seeing your gamma waves, which are essentially your subconscious waves, and your alpha waves, your active thinking waves, when the idea bursts forth, they switch. The idea bursts forth from your subconscious into your conscious mind, which has a concurrent decrease in alpha waves. So basically, this is proof that this kind of thinking works. And sometimes overthinking or thinking too hard on it gums us up. It makes us anxious. Sometimes we got to give ourselves credit to let it go. And that might be for 10 minutes. It might be an hour. It might be a week. It might be a month. But make sure you're taking an active break, not just flipping on Netflix and being like, no, I'm working on my paper, Mom. So Scott Barry Kaufman, who I mentioned before, talks about how neurodivergent and creative people show tendencies of thoughts that are that contain multitudes. So, we need to expose ourselves to a lot of different things. We need to encourage independent work, lock yourself in. You might not know where you're going, but you're getting closer to the goal every day. Both sentences in that can be true. And that's hard for a lot of kids to wrap their heads around, right? Well, how can I be moving towards a goal if I don't know what the goal is? I don't know, but every day you work at it, you're getting closer to creating something. It's also worth noting here that sometimes we have to jump forward without knowing all of the content. So there's a famous story about Einstein where when he wrote the theory of relativity, he knew the physics, but he didn't know the math. He wrote the paper, published it, obviously, groundbreaking, and they gave himself a year to learn the math to back up his work because he knew that he was going to upset the establishment and he would have to talk to all these people to make sure that he could show his work with the math. If he had waited to learn the math to write the paper, he may never have written it. By writing the paper first, he gave himself permission to leap forward, and then he had to work hard to keep up with himself. Another concept here that's really important for creativity is flow. So this is the idea from the great Czech psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. The idea is that flow is a highly focused mental state that's conducive to productivity. It is the equivalent of being in the zone, as it were. Some people quote it to the runner's high, but it's mostly that feeling where time has gone away, right? You are really enjoying raking the leaves, right? And you look up and 3 hours have gone by, like, where'd that time go? Right? Or you are in your creative writing group and you guys are all working on a story and you look up and it's like, oh my gosh, class is over already. We feel flow where we have the right mix of anxiety, I'm sorry, of challenge and skill. Too much skill and too little challenge leads to boredom. Too much challenge, too little skill leads to anxiety. What we want to do is have the right mix of anxiety, of skill and challenge. And that's going to look different to each different person in each different thing. So, what I have here in, actually, I'll just show you guys because computers, right? There's my foosball table. I am a really good foosball player. So I have a super high level skill like that. And I know that if I'm playing somebody and they are a good challenge for me, I mean, I could be doing that for hours. And it's like time goes away. But if I'm playing somebody who's better than me, then I don't enjoy it because it's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to win. I don't feel like I have a chance. But if I'm playing someone who's so much worse than me, my children love to play foosball with me. It's adorable because they're my kids, but it's a little boring because they can barely reach the bars. So we're trying to find that challenge and skill level match. So if you have a kid who's stuck, who's not doing what we want to do in class or in soccer or in the arts or whatever, they may not be in a flow state. We may have to reset the scale on skill and challenge. Ultimately, creativity takes courage. And there are lots of reasons for kids to not be courageous, to be anxious. And there's a lot of anxiety in kids today, because things like math are safe, right? 3 times 3 is always 9. It's always 9, right? But writing a paper about what you liked about Wind in the Willows requires you to put a little bit more of yourself in there. And that can be a lot scary to a lot of our kids, especially our neurodivergent kids. So here's how to look for anxiety, anger, special little things, difficulty sleeping at home or settling in class. It's a great way to see the kids anxious. Defiance. Kids who feel out of control will control whatever they can. A lot of times that's us as the grown-ups in their lives. Explosions, lack of focus or over planning. Kids who will outline 80 pages of a paper when you really just need them to write 3 paragraphs. Because over planning means I'm anxious, and as long as I'm planning, I don't actually have to do it. Avoidance, finding reasons not to do the thing. Negativity, I can't do it, so I won't do it. And always getting pulled to the future. Depression pulls us to the past. Anxiety always pulls us to the future. I worked with a young woman once who was really upset about a math test, and she was like, well, I have to do well on this math test, because if I don't do well on this math test, I'm not going to get an A in math. If I don't get into A in math, I won't be in the honors track next year. If I don't get in the honors track next year, there's no way I'm going to be in math club. And if I can't be in math club, I can't do mathletes. If I can't be in mathletes, there's no way I'm going to go to Caltech, which means I might as well go to community college, which means I'm going to end up here in my terrible town. It's like, you just jumped 20 years into the future. Like, let's just take a breath, right? We're going to do this one step at a time. So if you have a kid who's anxious and stuck, here are some great techniques to use. Just have them doodle for 5 minutes. Just have their pen on the paper, make wibbles, write your name, make cartoon drawings. Something about that process makes us get unstuck. Another one is the 2-minute mountain. We talk about how the first 2 minutes of doing something new are the hardest. So, like when I go for a run, I hate running. When I go for a run, I'm like, I know I have to do this, but I hate it. And what that gives me permission to do is to not have to love it. But I also know that for that first 90 seconds, right, I'm going to have an awesome song on my playlist because I really need to get through that first part of the run. Now, after the first 2 minutes, it doesn't magically become fun. but it gets a lot easier to do. And when we do that, we do a lot better. Now, you can't challenge kids who tend to want to do projects one way may actually get more creative if you tell them, okay, you can't do it that way now. Like, I know you always draw cartoons for your history papers, but now you can't draw cartoons. You have to do a PowerPoint or you have to write a paper. You may find that unlocks some other creative techniques. And then reverse engineering. And now this is one that I saw at a creativity conference, and I've used it a couple of times, and I cannot believe how well it works. Kids are stuck. You say, okay, cool. You did the thing. You completed the lab. How did you complete the lab? It's like, well, I don't know. We completed the lab. Well, tell me what you would have done. Well, to complete the lab, we needed to do this, this, and this. And I guess we needed to do this. And then they go, oh, and to do this, I need this other thing. Boom, they're in. And when anxiety blocks the way forward, we can't see it. Sometimes just skipping that part, going to the end and going backwards actually helps. It's almost like knowing the end of a book or a movie before you read it or watch it. It's like, well, if you know Superman's not going to die in the Superman movie, when Superman is inevitably in peril, it makes you a little bit less anxious, a little bit easier to engage in the movie because you know he's going to be okay. We deal with a lot of pushback, a lot of feelings around this stuff. So here's some do's and don'ts. So when kids are like, I can't do this, I suck at this, it's like, oh, it's not that bad. We say, hey, I know that this is hard. I see that you're working hard. We praise the behavior we want to see. Don't problem solve for kids. It's like, I can't do this. I can't do this. Okay, all you need to do is, no, that actually tells, at some level, it communicates to kids, you're right, you can't do it. You won't be successful, so I'm going to have to do it for you. Ask, what resources do you have available? What haven't you tried yet? Don't get offended. The biggest thing about working with kids is to take your ego out of it. Oh, you think this assignment is stupid? It's not stupid. Talk about what's getting in your way. Be curious, not critical. And then don't get sucked into the content. Kids will give you 35,000 reasons why they can't do a thing or why something else would be better. Focus on the process. We want to develop some personality traits. This is really consistent with Scott Barry Kaufman's work. Plasticity, the ability of the brain to change when it gets new information. Divergence, amplifying independence in their own paths, being brave. Convergence, taking in information actively, and being resilient. Now, and I would say as a clinical psychologist, my biggest job is to create resilience in kids. So increasing their ability to self-soothe, self-care, take care of themselves, express their feelings, have hope, optimism, and have it all fit together. When you put all those pieces in, that you get a resilient kid who doesn't avoid challenge, but knows if they are challenged, they can overcome it. So here's when we would play a game called Hooray for Us. The way that this game works, and it's a great team building exercise, it's a great thing to do with your kids in class, is have 10 kids stand up in the front of the room. They're going to count by ones from 1 to 10. And when they get to 10, the whole room yells hooray for us. The person who said 10 makes a rule. And the rule is we'll replace any one number with something. So instead of number 3, you clap your hands 3 times. Then that person starts with 1 and the count goes again. So it goes 1, 2, and then the person who's 3 claps their hands 3 times. If they mess up and they forget, we call it out, and then the person who made the mistake starts over at 1. Sooner or later, you're going to have a rule for all 10 numbers. Now, rules can't be replaced or changed, and you want to see if they can go through all of those pieces. Now, this game involves a lot of creativity, thinking on your feet, and it involves a lot of resilience because you're going to make a lot of mistakes. I've never played this game without somebody forgetting some rule. And organically, we talk about how to support each other. Can you give people hints? Can they ask for help? What does your kid need to build that skills? I'm the sort of person when I'm facilitating this, I'll give a kid a hint. I'll be like, oh, I'm not saying you need to really think about this if the idea is scratch your head, but there's no wrong way to do it, but you want to support kids in developing that resilience. If this work seems interesting to you, I couldn't recommend highly enough The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. This book changed my life. I still do my daily pages, 3 pages a day. How to get feedback. It's a really amazing book, and you could totally do it as a group study in your classroom with your students. So as we come to the back part of this presentation, I'm going to show you a classic image, a red Solo cup. And you might think to yourself, why are you showing me this picture? Well, what can you do with a red Solo cup? And I'll let you think about that for a second. And now that you thought about it, you guys probably said, well, you can drink from it. Sure. What can you drink from it? Cold liquids, hot liquids, alcoholic liquids, non-alcoholic liquids. Can you eat from that? Can you use it for pencils? The idea here is a Solo cup is a really great way to show the different kinds of creativity. So the categories are practical. The practical uses of a Solo cup are how many things can I drink from a Solo cup? That's very practical. Aspirational. If I was an expert at this thing, what could I do? Right? If you were an expert at cup stacking, you could be a world champion cup stacker. If you're inventive, what can I create using this? How could you use a Solo cup to build something, right? Could you use it as a gardening tool? Could you use it to make sandcastles? If I did this thing for its opposite purpose, right? If you crush the Solo cup, what can you turn it into? You could use it as a ninja star. You could use it as a paperweight. Probably wouldn't be a great paperweight, but you could. The idea there is your kids are going to go like, oh, I'm not creative because I didn't think to glue them together and turn them into a unicorn horn. I just thought that you could eat cereal or oatmeal from your Solo cup. It's like, but not everybody thought that you could eat oatmeal from a Solo cup. You totally could. So that's creative. It's just creative in a very practical way. If your kids are telling you my ideas aren't good enough, we tell them first, there is no scale. Creativity exists everywhere in micro states and in macro states. So you can be creative in what color pen you use to write a paper. And you can be creative in macro in like, how am I going to navigate this birthday party? Creativity looks and feels different for everybody. Good ideas can and will come from anywhere, and you'll never know if you don't do it. So there are lots of different ways to add creativity in your class. Art, gym, ELA, math. I love the math. Where is math happening in your life? That's a really fun exercise. Science, cooking is full of science. So you have a kid who just isn't really like locking onto your physics experiments, maybe have them do some cooking. And I always like to include this, like, kids who want that big C creativity, right? The paradigm shifting thing. Look at the Pulitzer Prize winners in these different fields or the Fields Medal winners. They're all so different, right? If you look at, the Tony Awards for Best Play, I mean, yes, you've got Hamilton in there. You've also got Rent. You've also got How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And if you're a musical theater nerd like I am, those are 3 very different shows, right? The idea here is that it's not that there's one way to win, right? It's not there one way to be successful. Success is its own category. It doesn't matter how you enter it. It just matters that you do, right? So if your kid's like, well, I have to write a great war story if I'm ever going to write a great novel, there are lots of great novels that don't have anything to do with war, right? Show them these different successes, and I think they'll really unlock some stuff. So here are our takeaways. Creativity can't be wrong. It's not always the right fit for what we're trying to do. Creativity is a great way to connect with your students, create that classroom environment. Boundaries around creativity are appropriate and can be proactive. They'll protect all of you. Anxiety interferes with creativity. Different styles of thinking lift to different styles of creativity, and that's okay. That's something you're really going to have to emphasize for your students. And creativity isn't one thing. It can be anything. So here's some additional resources for you. A couple great TED Talks, the Torrance test, and how to get flow. And if you have any questions, here's how you track me down. I really enjoyed giving this talk, one of my favorites. So if you have any questions or you want me to come and do this stuff for you in person, feel free to drop me a line here. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.